applying for a tenure track job is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So what I mean by that is, don't leave it until you've finished your PhD or you're in your last year to start looking for jobs and developing your skills. Start early, develop those skills, nurture those relationships. So when you're in your last year and you're finishing your PhD, things will be so much easier.
Welcome to the 63rd episode of the Struggling Scientist podcast. We are a podcast by scientists, for scientists, anyone science adjacent, and perhaps even hobbyists. My name is Suzanne and I'm here with my co-host Jayron.
Hi.
So even as a PhD student, I would say it's not really clear how to have a successful career progression in academia. Usually any questions are answered with a statement like, that is different for everybody, or the whole concept of tenure track is shrouded in mystery. Today we're talking with an expert on the topic, Emmanuel Tsekleves, who is a professor and research director at Lancaster University and provides advice that helps PhD students and postdocs secure tenure track jobs in academia. So let's start.
If you like this episode, you can follow us or leave us a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform. This really helps us out and makes this podcast possible. Welcome, Emmanuel. We are so happy to have you on our podcast today.
It's my genuine pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, of course. Before we get started with our fascinating topic, we would love to know more about you. Could you introduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you? What is your expertise? Any interesting hobbies?
Sure. You've already covered my name. And as you mentioned, I'm a full professor. We call them chair in the UK, with my own research group and also research director of an international research group between our university and a private university in Malaysia. My journey started also 15 years ago when I finished my PhD and was looking for jobs like many PhD students and your listeners out there, and managed through trial and error to find my way and climbed fairly quickly from PhD graduate to professor in 15 years. And seeing a lot of my colleagues, peers and students struggling with getting jobs, I decided to do something about it. So now just lift up the hood of academia and offering insight and knowledge, giving people a bit of a guiding light on their journey. In terms of hobbies, I love dancing so much that actually several years ago, I spent a whole month in Cuba to learn Cuban salsa. Went to a lot of dancing workshops, also like Greek and Cretan dancing, and I play a musical instrument, a string-based musical instrument that you only find in the island of Crete in Greece.
Wow.
So yeah, music is my cup of tea.
Nice.
Cool.
Have you always been interested in dancing?
No, it's started actually in my mid-30s.
Okay.
There's still hope for you, Jayron.
Yeah, she's been
Never say
taking.
never.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, she has taken me to a dance class before. Yes. Okay. Bringing it back then to the main topic of our episode today. So the elusive tenure track. Can you maybe explain to our listeners what the tenure track actually means and when are you, quote unquote, on it?
Sure. There's a, as you said, it's shrouded in mystery about what it is. It's a fancy term to basically signify a permanent job. That once you are on it, you've got your assistant professorship, or in the UK they call it lectureship, and basically you're on a track to become a full-time academic. It starts when you first land a lectureship or an assistant professorship, and usually the first 3 to 6 years, depending on the country you're doing your lectureship, is count as a probation. So you have certain targets in the industry that we'll call them KPI, key performance indicators. They usually relate to research that you need to reach. And once you achieve those, then you are officially progressing to what they call a tenure track. And you've officially member of the faculty.
Okay.
Okay. And are those always very clear, like the what you need to reach to get in?
On the whole, it's things related to research, but it differs from institution to institution and from country to country. So to give you an example, in the UK, in most institutions, you achieve tenure if you meet your goals within the first three years of your appointment. Exams could include that every year you submit 1 to 2 research grants as a principal investigator or co-investigator, and you submit 1 to journal publications or high esteemed publications, and also you complete your teacher training. In the US, it's actually longer. It's up to 6 years, although within the first 3 years, you've got an interim probation where they kind of check your levels of where you are in different parts of the world. This is different years, but the process is more or less the same.
Okay. And what does the timeline on average look like?
It's between, I would say, 3 to 5 years overall from when you get your first appointment.
And that's when you become assistant professor and then move upwards. Yeah.
You in the US you start as a lecturer and then you become assistant professor. In the UK you start as a lecturer A and then you become a lecturer B. In other parts of the world you start as a lecturer and then you become an assistant professor. Or you start as an assistant professor, but you only confirmed after you pass your probation.
Okay.
Yes. So you already alluded to some of the differences in different countries, but are there any? You also mentioned some of the KPIs, as it were, that you might need to hit to reach your goal. Are there any really big, stark differences between countries that you can think of, like really massive outliers or anything like that?
There's differences in it depends also quite a lot on the institutions along as the country. So, for instance, you have top or high-ranking universities in different parts of the world, and they tend to have very similar processes, independent of the country they're based. And you have mid-ranking or lower-ranking universities, which they try to up the game to gain reputation in those ranking tables. And quite often they would have very, so I would say, ambitious KPIs. So they will ask newly appointed academics to publish high quality, high impact papers in high esteemed journals, and they will ask for many. So the quantity will be higher sometimes than the quality, because in some ranking tables, your ranking depends on the number of publications an institution has rather than the quality. So they play the numbers game. And also, typically in lower mid-ranking universities, you have more teaching workload. So you have less opportunity to do research. So it's unfair when you're asked to have a lot of research outputs when you're not given really the space to develop your research.
So in that sense, it might actually be better to go, if you could manage to get into the higher ranked universities, you might have it, quote unquote, easier.
Okay. So let's say for PhD students now, how do you work towards this? What are the steps you need to take to be accepted into a tenure track position?
Very good question. Several. To basically get a tenure track job, you need or you'll be asked to contribute in 3 main areas. Of course, the first one is research. And in terms of research, they would want you to bring research funding from external funding bodies in the country that you're based or internationally to produce research outputs. Graduate PhD students form your own research group. Also, teaching is another big part. So you'll be expected to deliver teaching programs, develop new teaching programs, supervise and tutor student work, assess. Also, and the third part is called academic citizenship or academic engagement or academic management, and basically is being part of the academic management of the department you belong to. So that could mean being a research director when you're more senior, when you're more junior. It could be being a director of a program or being in charge of the admissions, the marketing, the recruitment, or the equal opportunities and inclusion. So when you apply for a tenure track job, you need to demonstrate that you have ideally some skills, and definitely you have the potential for those three areas. And it really starts by, of course, as you're doing a PhD, you're developing your research, you're developing research outputs. The research funding is a bit more challenging unless you're working with other PhDs to submit, or with your supervisor to submit research grant proposals that align that way. Teaching is very important. So any teaching opportunities you have, formal or informal, this will help you develop a teaching portfolio, which is how you demonstrate to hiring committees that, look, I've done a bit of teaching, a bit of assessment, I've supervised students, I can do this. And the third point is leadership. And this could be small roles. So it could be, for instance, within the department, you form a PhD group, a PhD support group, or you're a coordinator of PhD students, or you involve in some committees, or even externally, you co-organize a PhD program at a workshop or at a conference.
I would say that in our field, it's quite normal to do a postdoc, and then during the postdoc sort of work towards getting the grants and writing a lot of grants and trying to get the money like that to move up. But I do have to say that I don't see a lot of postdocs doing any teaching in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Neither do the PhD students, for that matter. But
I think, at least in our field, there were some instances of it, but definitely not a lot. I
Not a
think,
lot.
you know.
It might actually be difficult then to go to another country where something like that is very expected.
It's generally universal. I would say that you start with a PhD, then you move to postdoc. Or sometimes you do your PhD while you do your postdoc. So you get basically a research assistant job, and at the same time you do the PhD. For instance, in the UK, you can easily do that, and in fact, the institution will pay for your tuition fees as well. So it's useful, as you already mentioned, in terms of getting some research grant experience, maybe some more publications. But it doesn't necessarily help with teaching unless you specifically pursue that.
Yeah.
What I've seen happen, unfortunately, with a lot of postdocs is two things. Either they focus so much on the research, because of course that's the whole job, is to delve deeper into research, that they neglect the other two elements, the teaching and the academic citizenship. So it means when they apply for jobs, they can talk about the research, but not the other elements. So I've seen postdoc veterans actually losing jobs to PhD graduates who have a more holistic academic background because they have the other points. The second element is being a postdoc and being a lecturer are quite different. When you're a postdoc, you do a lot of the research, you conduct the experiments, you're in the lab. When you're a lecturer, assistant professor, you don't do the research. You manage the research, you bring the research grant, and you have postdocs, PhD students doing the research. So if you have many contracts as a postdoc, sometimes I've seen people that they have an amazing research track record, but when it comes to the interview, they talk about what research they do rather than where they're going to apply for funding, how they're going to build up the research group. And the third point is sometimes being a very good researcher may be a negative, because unfortunately, some of my colleagues may think, this is a person I want to keep as a postdoc. I don't want them to apply for a lectureship. So they may sabotage. And unfortunately, I've seen that happening. And also I've heard from colleagues and friends happening as well.
So you now touched on several of the factors that are quite important for transitioning towards the tenure track and eventually making professorship. Can you shed some light on exactly how that decision is made? So what maybe the committee behind who's actually making the decision and how do they base that decision based on these factors?
Sure. There's two different processes. The one is the application, and the other is the interview. I say they're different process because they've got different weighting. I'll talk about that. So you submit your application, which usually composes of a lot of documents, your full CV or resume, cover letter explaining why you're best fit for the job. Some institutions will also ask for a teaching statement where you talk about the teaching you've done, and a teaching portfolio where you demonstrate what you've done. You have some samples of feedback from students you receive, the evaluation you got for the module you taught, and a research statement where you talk about the research you've done and what is your future plan for research. They will review all these documents. Usually is a committee of between 3 to 5 people that blindly and independently review these. Usually they do it through an online system. And they score it. And depending on the score, then the top 3 to 4 individuals that will be shortlisted for an interview. I have to say that the vast majority, so over 90% of tenure track jobs, they're funded by the department and the university, unlike the majority of postdoc jobs that they're funded through a specific research funding project. And this is an important distinction, and that's why it's a route to permanent job. So once you've shortlisted and you're invited to an interview, in several institutions, you'll be given a task to do. And it could be, for instance, doing a micro teaching. So for 10 to 15 minutes in front of the panel of interviewers. So panel is a group of usually 4 to 5 academics from the department you're applying to. You present teaching, or it could be they ask you about a specific research proposal that you present, and then you have the formal interview, who lasts between half an hour to an hour. On average, I would say about 40 minutes. And this is also a panel interview where they will going around asking questions related to research, teaching, and academic leadership. I did mention at the start that it's a different process, and this is because the interview really is where the decision is made. I've been in many situations where applicants, they looked amazing on paper, but at the interview, there was an outlier. One you thought, yes, we'll invite him for the interview, but they don't look as strong as the other two. And in fact, they're the ones you decide, this is the person we want to hire. Because, of course, you interact in person or online, you find out more about whether they're a team player, and also how well they can communicate their work, but also how they respond to the questions. I've been, for example, in an interview where until the very last question, that candidate answered everything perfectly. It was the perfect candidate, and in my mind, this was the person to hire. Until it came to the very last question, and that changed everything.
And what was that question?
What are your future plans for the next 5 years?
Oh, well, intense.
It's a big question also.
It's a standard question, usually one of the last questions they ask you at the interview.
But he didn't have a clear plan, or...
He had a plan, but it's not what you say at an interview.
Oh, okay.
That's the thing. I mean, I've been in many situations where I say, no, you shouldn't be saying that, or you should have been right in your application, or you should say it in a different way.
Okay. Well, in that light, what are common mistakes that people make when trying to get the tenure track job?
Yeah, the first of all is it's very easy once you're experienced hiring committee member to see the ones that they apply for every single job out there. So they don't customize at all their application. It's a blanket application. Sometimes they even may have the wrong name of the institution. So that's one mistake, quality over quantity, really customizing the application. The other, which is I've seen 80% of applications and interview people talking about what they have to gain as opposed to the value they will be bringing to the specific department or institution. So tell them what's in it for them rather than what's in it for you.
Yeah.
Is a key message. One I've already covered is about how do you communicate your skills. Sometimes some interviewees, they talk for ages, very, very long answers, but they really don't tell you what you've asked them for. There is specific interviewing techniques with a specific structure you can focus to answer in a very effective and efficient manner. And not everyone is using that, unfortunately. And another thing is talking about negative experiences. And it's common, unfortunately in academia, not everything is positive, but at an interview or an application, you always bring the positive life. Even if it is a negative experience you have, you should turn it into a positive. Because again, this is something the hiring committee picks up and thinks, well, that's not the person we want to bring an institution.
So now that you've covered some of the mistakes people tend to make, how can someone, for example, stand out more as a candidate when they're actually applying? In a positive way, of course.
Yeah. I would say there's four main strategies, and it really starts by defining your academic identity and brand. Where what topics in terms of research you want to pursue, what principles guide your teaching philosophy, and you're able to communicate them. Have been clear about these can help pinpoint to search committees the unique value you offer. The second one I would say is cultivating a diverse professional network. So once you define your brand, you build your team, and this is where you've network beyond your institution, beyond your field. You seek out mentors and brands how to connect with other researchers, because this way you can get connections that can write recommendations letters for you, but also you can gain access to unadvertised opportunities. The third thing, and this alludes to what I mentioned before, is about conducting a targeted job search. As I said, quality trumps quantity of applications. So being selective and strategic is important. Identify the institutions you want to be working and research them thoroughly before you're applying. Find out about the culture they have, the initiatives, the programs, the strategies they have, the values. And, you can even leverage the networks you've already created to get some insights into these. And of course, building an online presence is important nowadays. And this is not just having a website, but engaging in discussions in social media, having a LinkedIn presence is, I would say, quite important now in academia. And there's a lot of search committees that will look at people when they apply, and there are others that they will also doing search by LinkedIn and other online systems to find suitable candidates.
That surprises me, since I would say the presence of scientists on social media is still minimal.
Yeah, I think you have some outliers, I guess.
Yeah.
It is, but this is where it's really heading. So those ones that have those, they have added value and more unique selling points. So these are the ones that stand out. And it's all about standing out in a sea of applicants.
Sure. Are there a lot of different roads people take to get into tenure and to get into a professorship in the end? Are there different paths you can take?
There's 2.5, I would say, main paths. One is, as we said, the most common after your PhD, you go for a postdoc or a number of postdocs, and then from then, when a relevant opportunity opens up, you apply for that. The other one is going straight from a PhD to a lectureship, provided you have a teaching portfolio. And the other one, which is less common, this is, the half-baked where it comes, is sometimes people from the industry that have industrial experience or experience outside academia that actually can gain a lectureship. It's more common to find them in more established professions. So, for instance, in health sciences and medicine, where you've got someone with experience and a lot of practice that then they become an academic and they follow that process.
Okay. I actually was wondering a little bit more on the sort of paths that you can take. What would you advise someone, for example, if they already have like the funding, they have like some sort of social media presence, but maybe the department that they want to work at doesn't have any positions open? Should they apply somewhere else, or would wait it out, or try to apply? What would you suggest in that situation?
In any case, I would say connect with the persons and the institutions you want one day to be. You have nothing to lose by doing that, only to gain. The academic world, actually, you'll find is very small, and people sometimes they circulate, they move from one institution to another. So always be nice to people, because you never know where you'll find them through your academic journey. They could be reviewing your paper, they could be reviewing your research grant, they could be in a hiring committee, or they could have an open opportunity. It depends on where you are on your journey, and on, of course, your finances. You wouldn't want to wait for 5 years for a position to open. If maybe there is a year and you know that actually there is a position to be open and you can do something else in the meantime, yes. But what is important is to maintain that contact with that institution. And at the same time, I would personally apply somewhere else, gain that experience, that track record. So then when that ideal position in that ideal institution opens, I've got more experience and a longer CV I can use.
Yes.
Okay. So then when you actually become an assistant professor and are on the tenure track, as they say, what does that then look like? What are the key milestones and expectations for someone?
I have to say, it looks like mayhem at the start. It's very, very challenging because you're working with a very different mindset. Whether you came as a PhD graduate or as a postdoc, it's a very different world. Everything is new to you. You've got a lot of teaching, usually in most institutions, to be doing, and this takes work to prepare your materials for teaching, to practice, to develop your skills of standing in front of a lecture theatre or in labs and transmitting your knowledge. Doesn't mean that because you have a knowledge you can transmit it unless you've got already a lot of experience. You have admin duties, which are not always fun, but they come with a job. And you've got those specific targets you need to meet for your probation. So it can be very stressful. And because you tend to spend a lot of time with teaching, sometimes your research suffer, unless you're in research institutions where they have a good mentoring system and a lot of support. But to be honest with you, that's rare. So unfortunately, there is a lot of junior academics that I see burning out because of the pressures they have. Some that really thrive and they can really navigate through that. They've got a very clear path, very clear mindset. They've got the skills. But most tend to be sucked by the vortex of teaching.
And what additional sort of common struggles do you see early career academics struggle with on while navigating the tenure track?
It's a bit of identity at the start if they haven't established that identity, and where they want to focus. Because the ideal is, in order to become a full professor, you need to, in a sense, demonstrate that you're an expert in a very niche field. And actually, I went through that mistake when I first entered, and I was applying for research funding in a lot of different areas, and I wasn't portraying myself as an expert in one. The same with my publications. They were all over the place. It was only when I got a mentor where she said, look, Emmanuel, you need to pick up an area and focus on that, when things became easier.
Okay. What final pieces of advice do you have for PhD students or early postdocs who are considering pursuing a tenure track job?
I think two key advices. The first one is applying for a tenure track job is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So what I mean by that is, don't leave it until you've finished your PhD or you're in your last year to start looking for jobs and developing your skills. Start early. If you ever run for a marathon without any training, as I've done in the past, you realize, if you manage to finish, your whole body aches for weeks to come. It's the same with the tenure track. Start early, develop those skills, nurture those relationships. So when you're in your last year and you're finishing your PhD, things will be so much easier. And the second thing that actually has had the most profound impact for me, but I see from colleagues, is get a mentor or a group of mentors. So if again, I use the analogy of the sports, if you look at high performance athletes, they have a lot of different mentors and coaches, some to encourage them emotionally, others to deal with their training, others to deal with their fitness, with their nutrition. Having a group of mentors that can help with a different aspect of academia, research, teaching, generally career advice, will make such a difference. It will make the journey so much easier. Things started change for me once I got a mentor, and I wish I had done it sooner.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today about this interesting topic. We really loved having you on our podcast. If people would like to find you, and how can they best do so?
Sure. They can reach me at Twitter and Instagram. My hashtag is at PhD to Prof Mentor. Also in LinkedIn, if they can spell my very long email. And also have a free weekly newsletter called The Academic Insider. So people can Google The Academic Insider. They'll find every week I post practical advice and information in how to get people closer to tenure track and other academic career related matters.
Cool. Okay, well, for our listeners, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, you can reach out to us via our website, thestrugglingscientist.com. You can also check out our website for some really cool science-inspired merch and sign up for our awesome Journal of the Struggling Scientist, aka newsletter. And if you have enjoyed this episode, then leave us a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform, as it helps us grow. And we're now also available on YouTube. You can also follow us on social media. Jayron, which ones are those again?
Twitter, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and also YouTube, as you said.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.